Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. And rest assured that food will be served, but it will be after the event. So you have to endure the next hour with us before you're able to be fed. Welcome. My name is Adam Lichtenheld. I'm the Executive Director of the Immigration Policy Lab here at Stanford. And thank you for joining us today for this discussion hosted jointly by IPL and the King Center. So just to give you a little bit of information about the hosts of this event, the King Center for Global Development is working to help improve the lives of people living in poverty around the world by supporting research, training the next generation of thinkers, and fostering conversations like this one on global development topics. And the Immigration Policy Lab, we generate rigorous evidence and innovative solutions to help policymakers make more informed decisions about immigration. Using big data, creative research designs, and cutting-edge analytical tools, we partner with governments, nonprofits, and service providers working on the front lines of migration to design and evaluate policies and programs that affect refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants around the world. So very, very excited and interested in this topic, and it's really great to see a book that has been written, I think, with such grace, and that has really underscored the agency and ingenuity of refugee populations, kind of countering the common portrayal of them as just poor, helpless victims. So to introduce our esteemed guest, Andrew Leon Hanna is a first-generation Egyptian-American entrepreneur, a Harvard-trained lawyer, Financial Times award-winning author, and adjunct professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Is that all, Andrew? That's it? I think you need a few more on your CV. He's the founder of Mona, a global social venture that connects underrepresented entrepreneurs with access to capital, distribution opportunities, product investment, and design support. Andrew is also the co-founder of DreamX America, which connects immigrant, refugee, and first-generation entrepreneurs to zero-interest loans. So today, Andrew and I will discuss refugee entrepreneurship through the prism of Andrew's debut book, which, if you've not gotten a copy, I highly recommend. 25 Million Sparks, the Untold Story of Refugee Entrepreneurs, which tells the stories of Asma, Malak, and Yasmina, 3 Syrian women entrepreneurs living in the Za'atari refugee camp in Jordan. So I think, Andrew, you wanted to read a segment of your book to give people a teaser if they haven't read it already?
Yes, thank you so much. And appreciate it so much, Adam. Thank you for all the wonderful work you and the lab do. It's an honor to be here with you in the King Center. Thank you to everyone who organized it, and thank you to everyone who is coming. Don't worry about the lunch. It'll just be 3, 4, 5 hours of reading the book, and then you'll have your lunch, okay? It won't be very long. 3 people just left. Okay. So I guess before I read, I'll give you a quick high-level overview to add to what Adam mentioned. The book focuses on global refugee entrepreneurs, so entrepreneurs all around the world. It does so through the lens of 3 Syrian women who fled the Za'atari camp. Also great pronunciation, I can tell that you're better than mine. And they are named Asma, Malak, and Yasmina, and I'll read right now a portion from chapter 1 that introduces one of them named Asma. Sitting alone in the center of her trailer, on a chocolate-colored cushion resting atop the chocolate-colored carpet, Asma looks down at a children's book. Her soft brown eyes dart across page after page in sheer concentration. It was a quick rehearsal for the performance to come, a rare moment of silence in trailer 6.4, District 8, Za'atari. Suddenly, without a word from Asma, the trailer around her is transformed. Children's laughter and stomping against the dirt outside grows louder and louder until the trailer walls shake slightly. The wooden door creaks open. 5 young boys take off their shoes and dive into the open space in front of Asma, as is their weekly ritual. Her living room had become a magical escape for them. Ahlan wa sahlan, ya Sami. Welcome, Sami. Asma greets each of them, her face having instantaneously switched from focus to a smile. If Yasmina's smile is wise and Malak's is eager, Asma's is soft and infectiously joyful. More and more children pour in, and last through the door are 2 of Asma's favorite students, her eldest daughters, Tamara and Maya, Tamra is shorter, older, and gentler, while Maya is taller, younger, and more playfully mischievous. Returning from Taekwondo practice, they're wearing matching white uniforms with yellow belts. They quickly say their hellos and head to the back room, re-emerging in matching ruby dresses with big ruby bows in their hair. They take turns giving Asma a hug before sitting cross-legged with their friends. It's time to begin. Yalla ya shabab, come on, children. With 3 words, as if Asma possesses a supernatural gravitational pull, the children gather to sit in a more organized circle surrounding her. Asma grabs a hold of her baby boy Muhammad and puts him firmly in her lap as she reaches over him to turn to the first page. The magic begins. This story is about a conversation between a boy named Samar and his mom. It is called A Plane That Brings Love. Asma's voice rises and falls as she reads the story with the passion of a once-in-a-lifetime audition. The children concentrate, spellbound by her performance, immersed in a world far removed from the Za'atari heat. At each page, Asma smoothly rotates the book toward the kids so they can enjoy the illustrations accompanying the dialogue. Mom, I want to drive an army airplane when I grow up, Samar says. Suddenly, Tamara stands and scurries to the kitchen. She returns with a water jug and glasses for the group. Always a gracious host. Asma continues. But I will be a pilot of love, not of war. I will draw red hearts and spread them everywhere from my plane. I will spread happiness, love, hope, and peace, so the little boys and girls can play in peace, so the birds flying around can sing in peace. Upon reaching the final page, she holds up the book to show a cartoon illustration of a boy with brown aviator goggles parachuting down onto the Syrian hills as his mom waits for him with open arms. His parachute is in the form of a red heart with the word love, or hub, labeled on it in 3 places. Yes, I will be a pilot of love, not war, so my country will be more beautiful, a country of hope, happiness, love, and peace. For a second or two, the words hang in the air. Asma closes the book. El Nihaya, the end. In an instant, the spell is lifted. The kids graciously thank Asma and begin to gather their things and leave, playfully pushing one another on their way out. In the moments after their departure, as their laughter fades in the distance, Asma is alone again for just a few seconds. She thinks back to when she was a girl 2 decades ago in the town of Daraa, and what her education meant to her. How she would sleep in her school uniform because she was so excited for the next day. How she dreamt one day she would become a teacher, but worried she lacked the confidence. As she put it, I loved school, but in class, when the teacher would ask a question and I knew the answer, I would have to wait until at least one person raised their hand first. Now, Asma is boldly reinventing herself as a social entrepreneur and poet, leading a storytelling initiative that is expanding throughout Za'atari. I want every girl to complete her education. Everyone should fulfill her dream. In that brief moment of quiet, Asma looks up and whispers a prayer of thanks for the chance to tashajja, to encourage, to gently uplift children toward the dreams they might otherwise have forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, I want to ask you a few questions, and don't worry, we will turn it over to you all, so you can also ask your questions of Andrew. And I guess I want to start with what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, definitely. I think, so for me, my parents are immigrants from Egypt, so we were talking about it a bit earlier. They were not refugees, they were immigrants, so the distinction is refugees are forced to flee from their home countries. Immigrants, it's more by choice. So it's not the same story, although there are similarities in having to move country, learn new language, all that. And my parents' story very much inspires me. So my dad grew up in a village in Egypt where not a lot of people spoke English or went to middle school or high school. He lived in a kind of a remote area. And he, basically became a successful primary care physician in the United States after studying in England. Wrote a book on healthcare. He retired recently, and I collected a bunch of letters from his patients that basically said, this person changed my life. This person saved my life in many cases based on his diagnosis. And he's meant everything to me. He's like a member of my family. And in particular, people of all races, backgrounds, ages, religions. So just the amount of unity and care that he brought to my community and obviously to my life And then my mom is a teacher, a preschool teacher, and she's done exactly the same to kids' lives. So very much focused on treating everyone with equality and dignity and uplifting kids. And so many people from my church and from other, the school that she worked at would say, like, my kid has become much more confident and alive. And so just that story of my parents in Jacksonville, Florida, and then the work that I started doing with DreamX America that you mentioned to help support small businesses run by immigrant and refugee entrepreneurs and first-gen entrepreneurs, I just saw the amount of beauty and hope and creativity and joy that immigrant and refugee populations were bringing to the United States. And I started learning more about it around the world. And unfortunately, at the time I started writing the book, and it remains so today, when I looked up at the news, I saw a very different story. So you didn't see the Afghan refugees in Houston after the hurricane who were helping to help firefighters navigate the water kind of flooded streets to get, to help put out a fire in a local house, or the immigrant and refugee entrepreneurs who are providing free food to the elderly during COVID. Those stories didn't come up as much. To me, it was more of what I would call, and what you mentioned, victim or villain narrative. So either refugees in particular, immigrants broadly, but especially refugees, are helpless victims who have no autonomy of their own, no power of their own. And so the only times we see them is when they're kind of huddled together, being shipped, for example, from Florida to another place and told to live here, or when they're crossing the border at their most vulnerable state, or they're seen as villains. And some, people will provide the rhetoric of they're going to take our jobs, they're going to commit crimes, they don't want to assimilate, all of which is not true. And I'll get into kind of that more. And so what I wanted to do with the book, long story short, is to tell a story that tells the power, equal dignity, creativity, and bravery of refugees, and to sort of, in some ways, let their voice shine through so that people can see this human story and see that actually refugees are some of the most inspiring human beings on the planet that we should look up to and we should welcome, rather than we should reduce to some kind of one-dimensional narrative.
That's great, and it's really inspiring and great to hear how the extent that it was motivated by kind of your own parents' immigrant story. Yeah. In the book, you use, and I think the passage that you read really illustrates it, what you call a voice-driven narrative style, right? So not just giving us a bunch of facts about this broader phenomenon that I think you're trying to illuminate, but really going deep and telling the story of these three individual women. Can you tell us more about that approach and why you took that approach, as opposed to, which as a researcher would be my impulse, of course, which is just to throw out a bunch of statistics and numbers and, theory and everything like that.
Yeah, I think a couple reasons. The first is, realizing, okay, it's very important to know, like, I'm never going to know what it's like to be Asma, or even 1/100th of the experience that she's been through, for so many reasons. I didn't grow up in the area. I didn't have to flee. I'm not a woman who had to deal with even more obstacles. And same with Malak, same with Yasmina, and same with all the others from around the world, that I wrote about, from Myanmar, from Vietnam, from Congo, from so many other places around the world that we wrote about. Ukraine, although we wrote the book before then, but same principle applies. And now folks fleeing from Gaza, the same principle applies. Like, I will never know what it's like to be those people. And so my main kind of instinct was, okay, how can I tell a story that tells a more a story that honors the voices of these folks, that amplifies the voices, and where I'm more of kind of an accessory that helps be a vehicle to get those voices forward, so that people can feel that human experience. Because I think the reason, to the extent that the book has been well received, it's because they get to know Asma, Malak, and Yasmina, not necessarily my voice. As interesting as I might think I am, I don't think that's really what appeals. And so it's kind of a realization that, it's less, if I really want to honor the dignity of these people, the best way to do it is to have a kind of oral history that their voices come through. And so how does that tactically look? Mainly, actually, chapter 1 was the most you'll see my narrative, because I'm sort of trying to set the tone and set the image for people. But after that, you'll see a ton of quotes. You'll see kind of the author narration is much more to kind of move the story forward, and it's a lot of their voice. And then you'll also see Malak's art. So Malak is an artist. Asma is a storyteller, social entrepreneur. Malak is an artist, and so her art is interspersed throughout the book. Beautiful art. Like I think if it was kind of equal opportunity in the world, I think she'd be like famous. I think she'd be on the cover of whatever art magazine I'm not cultured enough to know about. And then Asma's poetry is in the book as well. So it's kind of a creative collaboration. And then in the end, Malak is the one who, I'm still kind of talking with Malak and Asma on WhatsApp, and I'm friends with them. Malak is the one who's best at English, so she actually reviewed the book and kept, of course you have to keep kind of a separation in terms of, I'm not gonna make any edits that somebody would want, but basically it was just reviewing it to make sure, hey, did this honor your story? Did this honor your thing? Was all the facts right? And so those kinds of things were really important to me in telling a story that honored their dignity. And even like putting her art there, I thought was a way to represent the whole point of the book, which is look at how amazing and inspiring these folks are.
So I'm curious, how did they respond when you said you wanted to write a story about them, or you wanted to tell their story?
Yeah, is a great question. So I think they were very excited overall. I think the reason is I had a great partnership. So I had a partnership with Save the Children Jordan, and they introduced me to these folks. And I had a great guy named Sherbil. He changed his name. His name used to be Ahmed, but he was already integrated with the community, and so he helped kind of make sure there was peace and comfort. For me, I speak Arabic a little bit, so I think just even the attempt helped, even though it was kind of like, okay, that's cute, now let's leave it to Ahmed. But that helped, and I think also, like, I think people can tell when you have their best interest in mind. Like, it was clear I was not gonna come in and write something that, like, somehow, provided my social commentary on, is Asma doing the right thing for her family? It was much more like, hey, we're talking about your entrepreneurial adventures, and people love talking about that. And the reason I picked entrepreneurship is because it's such an interesting lens. It's like how you put your ideas and creativity into the world in practice. And so I think people love talking about that. So.
That's great. So you quote in the book a Syrian poet in describing that part of what the three main characters in the book, Yasmina, Malak, and Asma, are doing is trying to make a homeland. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious what you mean by that, and what role, you talked a little bit about why you picked entrepreneurship and what you think it kind of conveys and says about these experiences, but what role does entrepreneurship play in making a homeland for refugees, or at least for the refugees that you featured in the book?
Yeah, for the ones in the book, and for many others, I think it's their way of basically saying, like, I want to be a part of this community. So in a refugee camp, it's a little unique because everyone's, in that case in particular, everybody was fleeing at roughly the same time, within a couple years. And so everyone was new. And so in that case, like the book talks about how Asma, Malak, and Yasmina, for them it was necessity, first of all, because they needed to provide for their families. And then also they wanted to build up this community, like who knows how long they would be there. And unfortunately, it's been over a decade where the camps existed. So part of it is necessity and providing for the family. There's a story where Yasmina, the last one I haven't mentioned, she, as a wedding dress shop and salon owner, she sold all her kind of wedding jewelry, which is obviously very personally important, but then also the only thing monetarily that she had after kind of throwing all her stuff in trash bags in a truck and fleeing Syria in the middle of bombings and violence and going through checkpoints. And, she realized at one point when she heard back from people back home, I'm gonna be here for a while. So she sold all of her wedding jewelry and made this investment in a wedding dress salon and shop, which again, an incredibly beautiful shop. With like colorful dresses everywhere. You kind of go through, it's like a forest of dresses that you kind of pull through. And then in the back is her kind of like intimate salon where she encourages brides and helps them have a special moment even in the midst of the difficulty. So a lot of it is like developing the camp for people in the camp. And I try to make the point in the book, the camp is much better than it was in the past. Nobody should live in a refugee camp. It's still not anything anyone should live in, but because of these folks, they've made it better and better. And then the other part is, like I said, is wanting to become part of the community. And so, I just think that the rhetoric on refugees not wanting to assimilate, I think if you get proximity with people, I think you start realizing this is just not the case. I mean, perhaps it's the case for the occasional person, but overwhelmingly, it's like, I want to contribute to this community. And so we also do with Mona some job placement stuff. So even with non-entrepreneurship, people, the retention rate is higher. People are willing to do anything it takes. With entrepreneurship, they find these niches where they're bringing their home culture to the new society. So small businesses with Pan-African food or Chinese food or Middle Eastern food or whatever it may be. And it goes the gamut from those small businesses to migrants more broadly represent about half of unicorn companies, so billion-dollar companies. So I think for them it's A, we have to do it. We have to create support for our families in this new place, and then B, it's a way to create a home and these beautiful stories that I talk about, like after Hurricane Sandy, after Hurricane Harvey in Houston, during COVID, it's like you start seeing those moments that make you have hope and like belief in America, because you see like everyone coming together, and refugees are often right in the front of that because it's their new home, they were welcomed in and they appreciate it, and yeah, so it's a way to contribute.
Yeah, can you elaborate? You were starting to kind of talk about what it is about refugees or about immigrants that makes them more entrepreneurial. I mean, you kind of referenced, and we have some data, right, that indicates, and this is not just a refugee phenomenon broadly, when you look at kind of the rate at which we're here in Silicon Valley's backyard, a lot of large companies have been founded or are being run disproportionately by immigrants and refugees. So, and you talk about this in the book, so I'm sure the audience will love to hear, what is it about the experience, the circumstances of being a refugee that, kind of drives this phenomenon from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. And where I like to start with that is it's amazing because it's doubly fascinating because there's way more obstacles too. So I'm going to start looking over here more because I've just been ignoring this group of people. But the refugees and immigrants have, we call them, and they've been called by others, extreme entrepreneurs, because you have the most difficult circumstances and obstacles, but yet the highest rate of entrepreneurship out of almost any subgroup. And I'll start with the obstacles. So some of them are pretty obvious, but lack of access to capital. So start with lack of capital. So like I talked about Yasmina, just throwing all her stuff in trash bags in a truck, at night, having no idea where she's going to be. She didn't have much. Barely anybody who I think went to Za'atari had much, and often refugees have to flee in the middle of the night or suddenly, so they can't take a lot with them. So lack of initial capital, so not much of a safety net. Lack of access to capital, so they often don't have credit history, usually don't have credit history. There's well-documented discrimination on many fronts in banks. During even the PPP loan distribution, it was hard for smaller businesses of all kinds to get any funding. And then, language barrier, of course. For refugees, there's trauma. Asma, had to, when she fled, she had suffered a miscarriage in part because of a lack of healthcare access. People seeing, loved ones killed and murdered. So there's a lot of trauma that, is debilitating in many ways. And then there's of course a lack of connections and networks. So you don't know anyone in the city. It's kind of hard to even get easy stuff done. Sometimes I'm amazed, like my dad started his own doctor's office, primary care practice. And just like I'm a lawyer and it's hard for me to manage like letters that I receive, like it's hard for anyone to manage that. So much less a refugee who just came here, and I'm not talking about my dad in this case, as he was an immigrant, but if you think about some of the refugee entrepreneurs I work with, who come to like Portland, Maine, for example, and I want to start a car dealership. It's like, like so many things you have to get licensed, and if you want to become a doctor, it's even more complicated. So just an amazing level of resilience, and so that gets to the point of why are they successful? In the U.S., they're like about 1.5x more entrepreneurial in terms of starting businesses more frequently. They're actually even more entrepreneurial than immigrants more broadly, according to that data. And in Australia, I've seen 2x, so doubly as entrepreneurial. One reason is, if you think of like what's the holy grail of entrepreneurship, it's resilience, commitment, and risk-taking, in my view. And so resilience, nothing needs to be said. Like if you were ripped out of your home and had to push through 100 obstacles on the way, in a refugee camp, and being potentially abused on the way, being taken advantage of, having to learn a new language, that's resilience. And so a small business hiccup or a business thing, it's not as important to them. They're able to get through. Commitment, I'm an entrepreneur who, I have a lot of backup options. And so my commitment level is nowhere near going to be what Yasmina's was when she sold all her jewelry. You're all in, and this is for my family. I have to do it. So there's a huge level of commitment. And then risk-taking, like again, often it's a little bit interesting because it's not necessarily a full risk. Depending on the environment they flee from, it could be a risk or not, because some people will stay, some people will leave. So even leaving is a risk. But then there's many risks all throughout the process. And so being able to take risks. There's also studies that show a cross-cultural advantage. So if you have spent time, even as somebody who grew up in the US, you spend time studying abroad, there's studies that show that you come back and make better, more interesting, and more economically viable business ideas because you were able to see other markets and other cultures. So there's that. And then I think the last part is what you said about, or what you prompted about, why do they start businesses? A lot of it is an empathy and a desire to create home. And so there's a real desire to bring their talents and ideas, especially when they've had ideas that they haven't seen in the new country. And so an example of the cross-cultural advantage and a desire to create a home is Razan Al-Sous, who I got to speak with, and she created a halloumi cheese company in Yorkshire, England. And I really hate cheese. Like, it's the most disgusting thing in the world to me, so I have trouble talking through this. But so if I'll just give me some patience. But no, I'm sure her cheese is wonderful. She's won many awards. And the idea that she came up with was, okay, and this leads to the last reason why refugees are entrepreneurial, which is they're often rejected from job opportunities despite their qualifications because the systems are not set up for that often, and employers have to do a better job. But she spoke multiple language, has multiple degrees, very well qualified in England, fleeing from Syria, but she kept getting rejected. And she told in an interview with the UN, I think she said, it felt like being stabbed in the heart because she just kept getting rejected. People didn't recognize her as like a full human being with all these abilities. And so then she's at the store and she realizes, okay, maybe I can bring this halloumi cheese, which is popular in Syria, by bringing together the British milk and resources in Britain that are perfect for making this cheese, and the kind of Syrian style. And so she was able to do that. And another key theme is all it took was 2,500 pounds of a loan from the UK government. So the UK government doing that small loan program led to 100K plus in revenue every year. She's met like the royal family and all that. She's won a bunch of awards. She's employing people, local people, like people who are born and raised. And so that's just one microcosm of the example of what they provide. And just to give the last stat, the US government found that in a 10-year period, refugees have contributed $63 billion in net fiscal impact. So one of the common things is, well, it costs money to welcome refugees, right? It costs money to welcome, or they're going to be a drain on our resources. They're going to need the benefits that for lower income people and all this. Net fiscal impact means over and above all of what it costs. So truly, if you're like in a governor position or a president or a mayor, and someone says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. President, here's a Venn diagram, and morally correct is over here, and economically viable is over here, and something falls in the middle, that should be something you should pursue. And unfortunately, I think because of storytelling and narratives and biases and otherizing people, we see refugees in a different way when it should be 180. When we hear about refugees, like many mayors, we should be saying, we want to welcome them because they bring so much energy, so much economic vitality. They've revived many cities like Utica, New York, which was declining steeply. And so they have so many of these advantages that they bring, and despite all the challenges.
Well, it's a good thing that Razan, that you weren't her target customer,
Yeah.
given your lack of affinity for cheese. I have one more question, then I want to turn it over to the audience so that they can ask their questions. But we've talked a lot about kind of identity, and you mentioned kind of othering, but I'd be curious to have you talk a little bit about gender, because as the book focuses on 3 women, and I'm wondering, was that intentional? And what role did you observe about kind of the relationship between displacement and gender, and the role that gender played in kind of some of these entrepreneurial dynamics?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. It wasn't intentional. I often get this question because it's a coincidence. Coincidence that it was 3 women. I basically, the way I did it was I was introduced to all these people. I picked Za'atari in part first because I was going to do Utica, and the book talks a lot about Utica. But I picked it in part because I knew the Syrian war was one that has really been ignored for a long time. So it comes up every once in a while when there's a really tragic image. Like there was an image a few years ago of a boy named Ayman who passed away during a shipwreck trying to come to Europe, and he was on the shore. You all might have remembered that. That caused a lot of attention, a lot of fundraising. But other than that, there really wasn't much attention. And my parents, being from the region, I felt like some affinity to that as well. And so I wanted to tell that story. Then once I got to the camp, I met a lot of people. A lot of people are featured, but those 3 I felt just had the most connection with me personally, and just the most enthusiasm about their ventures that they were doing, and just the most diversity. Like Asma's over here, she had to like knock on people's doors and chase kids around to convince them to come to these sessions, and then it became dozens and dozens of kids that she encouraged, and she tells the story of how they used to come in and do these activities, and they would draw. She said, draw anything in your heart, and they would draw guns and things like, if you're a kid who just knows only war, that's all they would think about. But then after a year or so, a few months, she would do it again, and they would draw flowers, and they would draw themselves in the future. And she would write books with Syrian protagonists, and just giving them hope and belief. So that's, the diversity of stories is interesting because Malak uses art to touch people's lives and to talk about human rights and to encourage girls in the camp. And Yasmina basically helps people celebrate their big day in a way that maybe somebody who hasn't seen a refugee camp would be surprised to hear, that there's still these celebrations, and there's still marriages, and there's still a reason to celebrate. But partly why I think maybe they did stand out to me is because with the gender element, they had more obstacles. So it's even more inspiring, it's even more brave, it's even more amazing. Yasmina was pregnant when she first left. I talked about Asma's health issues and miscarriage. There's also, of course, as there is everywhere, gender dynamics that make it like less common to start businesses, and so there was overcoming that and being brave and bold in the face of any kind of gender discrimination they faced. So there was a lot, I think, that played into why maybe their stories were so compelling. But a lot of it too was just the personal connection. But even more broadly, to your point about gender and displacement, I did a lot of work when I was in law school writing about kids fleeing from Central America to the US, and families fleeing, and women in particular and kids are very vulnerable to these people at checkpoints on the way throughout Mexico, throughout Central America, where they're kind of they have to take a bribe basically to say like, hey, give me this amount of money or I'm going to, and very, very, very bad stuff. So the most vicious types of physical attacks, and women are most susceptible to that. Definitely with gender and with women and kids as well, but also men, it's a very treacherous path. And so that's partly why I say when they start their ventures, you can trust that they're gonna do everything possible, because just getting there is a miracle for some of them. So yeah.
That's great. Well, let's open it up to questions from the audience. What questions do you have for Andrew?
Hi,
Hello.
Andrew. How are you
Yeah,
doing?
good to see you.
Good to see you, too. My question is, so you came to Stanford for your MBA and have that knowledge. A lot of people attend the MBA program so that they could be entrepreneurs. And here we have these refugees that have no training or 2 years of school. in addition to the stories that you collected from them, did they consult with you or ask you about how to run their business? And if so, what specific things and advice did you give them from your
Thank you,
training?
Amy. Appreciate it. It's a good question. I think, interestingly, Stanford Business School's GSB students could learn a lot from these folks, maybe more than the other way, because a lot of what they're doing is actually like immediately running on the ground and like testing and piloting and dealing with customers. Whereas I think sometimes the startup culture in the Bay can be a little more like big ideas and PowerPoint decks, but they're actually and obviously everyone knows you should start pushing towards iterating, but they actually do it very well. And I always say this during talks, but I really mean it. Like, you saw like all these scandals with like Forbes magazine cover people. I think if Asma, Malak, and Yasmina were on like the cover of Forbes, I think we'd have a much better society because it's a type of entrepreneurship that is much more empathetic and much more about other people. Like, I've mentioned my venture DreamX America, but when people apply for zero interest loans, really across the board, like all the low and medium income entrepreneurs I work with, but in particular the immigrant and refugee and first gen entrepreneurs, invariably in their applications, part of the mission is I want to help people. Like, I want to help people through this, whether it's a dry cleaning business, restaurant, law firm, childcare agency. It's always I want to help people. And I think that could be a helpful reminder to business school students of, it's not, entrepreneurship at its best is like bringing something, in my opinion, is that bringing something about your personality into the world that helps other people and remembers those who are not as fortunate as you. And so it's amazing that, I talk about a little bit about during COVID, an entrepreneur I did the DreamX America film about named Moses. He's a first gen, his parents immigrated from Kenya. But he was struggling. He got rejected from the PPP loan with his Pan-African restaurant. And even in the midst of all that, like, he's trying to make ends meet. Immigrant-owned businesses during COVID were crushed, 30 to 40% closed, a very difficult time. He was still doing free food deliveries to the elderly in Durham, North Carolina. And so there's this kind of like, entrepreneurship is more than money making, it's about other people, that I think we, could learn from them. And I think that's partly why you see so many of them grow into huge businesses. They're good at treating customers well. They're good at scrapping. Like Hamdi Ulakaya came to speak at Stanford. He's the founder of Chobani when I was there. And I think someone asked him, like, did you think about taking venture capital money? And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, you think that was an option? Like, I just got a loan from somebody told me I could get a loan and get a factory. And then I've been running it on QuickBooks for the last, it's this kind of scrappy mentality that I think we could learn from. On the other side, I do think there's just certain things, like really all, I think in the US, for example, really all they need, they being like, underrepresented entrepreneurs more broadly, but refugee and immigrant entrepreneurs, when they're just starting, they need some capital, and it helps to have someone who can say, I did this before, and here's like how you register for an LLC. You don't need a lawyer, just do it really quick like this. Here's the cap, here's Kiva, they do zero interest loans. You don't have to get this kind of crazy interest rate. Here's how you navigate the regulations. So I think some of those simple things is the best way to help. But like to your point, just the cash is number one. That's why we focus so much on the loans. Yeah.
Hi, Andrew. Stacy Pena with Knight Hennessy.
Hey, good to see you finally.
I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about the company that you founded and what immigrants and refugees, and like, how do they find you or how do you find them?
Yes. So two kind of ventures, DreamX America and Mona. With DreamX America, we do the zero interest loans. We've done about $500,000 almost to immigrant, refugee, first gen entrepreneurs across the country. About half of them said, a lot of it was during COVID, so about half of them said that if it wasn't for this, they might have had to close or definitely would have had to close. And 80 or 90% said that they couldn't get a loan elsewhere. So for us, it was really a mission of how do we provide that support and be that bridge to these tech opportunities that they didn't know about, like the Kiva platform, and be like that hand in hand, like we'll help you write the narrative, we'll help you, we'll endorse you, we'll do everything for you, or with you. And how we find them, we do a lot of partnerships with local immigrant welcoming centers. So, for example, one that's been great in Portland, Maine, the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcoming Center. They have every day, I mean, the people at refugee resettlement and immigrant welcoming centers are doing such amazing work, like for often not as much pay as they should get. So people will come in every day and say, hey, I need help with my business, I need a loan. And so that's the perfect opportunity to say, okay, we know a program. All they have to do is fill out a quick Google form, and then we handle language assistance, we handle everything else. And we have a partnership with Kiva to do that. And then, just we launched the film on PBS to try to get more marketing too, so people found out through that. The other venture is called Mona, which you know a bit about, but it provides support for underrepresented entrepreneurs more broadly, primarily women, refugee, and immigrant entrepreneurs. So we carry on kind of the zero interest loan program in partnership with GMX America. We also have a gifting platform where basically all these consumer brands who have amazing kind of cultural products, like Nigerian chin-chin, Syrian date snacks, Taiwanese tea, Colombian coffee. Is everyone hungry for lunch? But what we do is we basically provide a big bulk purchase from them, and we package it to companies and say, hey, instead of getting that extra water bottle for your employees, let's get a gift box that includes all of this kind of beautiful small business stuff. So that's a product investment for them and marketing for them. And for them, we just cold email, and I think they're hustling, they're ready to go, and so we make a partnership work. And that's where media helps, because the more there's media attention on these folks, the more I can find them, the more other people can find them, and the more big companies can find them when they purchase stuff.
Hi, Andrew. My name is Walter.
Hey, Walter.
Currently an MBA student here.
Nice.
So actually curious to hear kind of how you thought through and kind of pursued some of your ideas while you were here at the GSB.
Yes, thank you, Walter. Yeah. It's a good question. I think for me, a lot of it was seeing school as an opportunity to do things and not just be a consumer. Like you have this Stanford brand behind you, you have all these people who want to help you. I think that's like a really brilliant opportunity. Like if you want, by the way, one thing I always talk about, if you want to write a book, if anyone wants to write a book, you should not be intimidated. It's not as like intimidating as it seems. And I'm happy to like talk with you afterwards about it. But that's a great thing to do at Stanford, because you've got attention of a lot of people, you got the email address, and you have the power to write something, just like anyone else does. And so that was cool, because I was able to launch. I had already been working on it, but I was able to launch it before I graduated, which was really cool. And I started writing it while in law school, because again, I kind of really started realizing when you're at school, it's a good opportunity to use the resources, use the attention, connect with professors, connect with people who write op-eds, or there's a lot of people around who can help. Also with Mona, there was something called Alpine Social Ventures, which is a impact investment group that started my first year, and so it continues now. So I was able to get an investment coming out that really gave me the confidence to keep moving. The Center for Social Innovation was really helpful, because they provided the summer funding. I don't know if you're first year? Yeah. So they provide funding in the summer. So does there's another entrepreneurship thing. So anything where I could find funding, to your point, like funding helps a lot. So, if I could find funding to launch this stuff, or just the space, like leverage a class. Like I took one class my first year where the assignment I just used to create the idea for Mona, instead of just an assignment for an assignment's sake. And sometimes that's good too. It's important to learn and all that. But when it started getting towards second year, you can start leveraging those classes into things that you want to do. And what I always say, like you may not, hope maybe someone needs this advice in the room, but there's a quote from Howard Thurman, who was kind of one of MLK's mentors, says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do it, because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. And so for me, I think school is a time where I can just kind of sense like what makes me come alive, what makes me light up in a way that I feel like this is what I'm meant to do. And I actually felt like this book was one of the first times I really, really felt that, because meeting Asma, sitting in that trailer, watching her teach these kids, knowing all she had gone through, knowing all these kids had gone through, seeing the humanity in them, I was like, I have to have as many people as possible see this humanity, and change the narrative about refugees so that more are welcome, more are supported, more are invested in. And ultimately, I'm going a little off track, but the main point of the book, we've talked a lot about the economic and all that, but ultimately the main point is this is not about their economic value, even though that's important. It's about their value as human beings. And so I felt really, I came alive thinking about that, and that's kind of set the course for my post-school life. So time to reflect is good too. Yeah, good luck.
Is there another question?
Hello, my name is Angela.
Hey, Angela.
So I have a question. What would you say to the venture capitalists that support people like Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, and not support women like the ones that you just mentioned?
Yes. It's interesting. I think, I think that was an example of, I'm not an expert on that particular one, but that is an example of kind of unethical behavior. And again, I think what refugees and immigrants, what I've seen is it tends to be a much more, obviously you can probably pull up a counterexample of one that did something wrong, but it tends to be so much more by the book, like so much more according to the rules and so much more empathetic, partly because a lot of the folks I work with, like the last thing they want is to run into the US legal system, that's not something they're interested in, because they're grateful to be here. They're not trying to there's a big fear of that. And so, I don't know, I guess I would say that, again, like investing in immigrant and refugee entrepreneurs at the VC level too is really important. And more broadly, even outside of this topic, I don't know how you avoid that. I do know that VCs, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I do know that VCs can get caught up in hype and not be as diligent sometimes. And so in that case, I think it helps to have some kind of discernment about the founder, whether they're got their head on right and their ethics right. I also think, like I said, she got a lot of coverage, right? Forbes, Fortune magazine. What if that ink was used on Asma? I think we'd have better role models.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. If anyone has one.
Thanks, Andrew. My name's Oliver.
Hey, Oliver.
We've talked quite a lot about, different ways of financing refugee entrepreneurs and, from cash grants, in the middle might be loans, zero interest, and we've mentioned VC as well. What is your view on the balance of those things? And within the more, the investment that expects a return, what are the moral hazards that we should look out for?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I think my experience is the more clean it is, especially when it's a small business, the better. So I was really drawn to Kiva's zero interest loan program because there's no hidden anything. It's zero interest, it's clean. Grants are obviously very clean. And to be frank, there's enough capital in America to be able to do that. Like in a dream world, we talked about the huge net income from refugees. I think that would probably be 2, 3, 4x if we provided every refugee who wanted to be an entrepreneur with a 2K loan, kind of like Razan, or 2K zero interest loan or 2K low interest loan. So loans and grants, I think on one side are the purest, and obviously zero interest or grant, you're not getting a return, but I think the government and I think foundations and businesses should step up and do that because for the country, it's a great return. I also think one thing I've seen more and more is revenue-based financing, which works better for these kind of small businesses where it's we're not taking a stake of your equity, and it's also not a loan where you have to pay back at a certain established interest rate. It's as you give back a portion of your revenue to pay back the loan plus a little more. I think that tends to be, from my experience, more of a win-win because it's you only pay back as you get revenue. And you only pay back cap to a portion of your revenue, so you're still able to function well. And if you do really well, then the investor also does really well because it has a cap of payback that's high, pretty high or high enough to make it a good return. And then VC funding, I mean, VC funding is riddled with biases, and I think, the numbers on percentage given to women and to Black women and to minorities is very low. The more that people who have these kind of high growth, that's how I kind of see it, is like when it's the more tech-enabled high growth, and that gets into the VC category, and those people should be treated just like the Stanford grad, just like the Harvard grad, just because they came from another country. Often they're incredibly technically gifted. They obviously have all these other advantages. They should be given the opportunity. And so for VCs, there's policies they can do to try to think about more open door policies, more less discriminatory policies, more blind review, things like that. And then the other thing I've seen is there's something called the Refugee Investment Network that has like a framework for not just investing in refugees, but investing in companies that do good for displaced people. One thing we haven't talked about, just the sheer magnitude, it's 35 million plus refugees in the world today, growing by the day. We have 100 million plus displaced. We have climate refugees becoming more of an issue, people having to flee because their homes are uninhabitable, and things like that. So, we need companies not just started by refugees and immigrants, but companies that are thinking about those problems. And so putting that as a priority, kind of like the way that VCs have really started to lean in on climate stuff. This is another crisis that needs to be, led into. And to your point, it's best when it's refugees or immigrants doing it themselves, like their own solutions. But it's also great when you have the Stanford grad or the Harvard grad, or maybe it's a hybrid of a Harvard grad who is an immigrant or refugee. But it's good if anyone has an idea that can help the displacement crisis.
I think that's a great place to end. Please join me in thanking Andrew for sharing his book and sharing his experience. Please, if you want to know more about King Center events, go to their website, go to the Immigration Policy Lab's website, and check out the cool work that we're doing trying to address these and other problems. You will receive an email once the event's recording is available. We are on camera. Hi. But thank you all for attending, and I believe now you're free to eat your lunch. So.
Yes, thank you for bearing with us. Bye.
Appreciate it.